Welcome to Mira Stories. Welcome to stories that will keep you on edge.
Michael Carter had always believed that destiny worked in strange ways. He wasn't a dreamer, not the kind to chase fairy tales. But on a chilly autumn afternoon in Central Park, New York City, his life took a turn that even he couldn't have predicted. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts from a nearby street cart, the leaves were painted in fiery shades of orange and red, and as he jogged past the Bethesda fountain, he accidentally collided with a young woman. Papers flew everywhere. Sophia Williams knelt quickly, brushing strands of dark hair from her face as she tried to gather her notes. Michael bent down too, apologizing, his Chicago accent rough against the soft New York air. Their hands touched as they both reached for the same sheet. For a second, their eyes met, his steady hazel gaze locking with her warm brown ones. Michael stammered, "I'm so sorry, I should have been watching where I was going." Sophia gave a faint smile. "It's okay. These notes belong to my nursing class. I guess I should have kept them in a folder." There was something in her voice, calm, kind, almost disarming. For Michael, who had spent weeks in New York for an architectural project, it felt like more than just an apology. It felt like the universe pressing pause for the both of them. As they walked together toward the park exit, Michael learned that Sophia was a nursing student at New York University, balancing long shifts at the hospital with her studies. She learned that Michael lived in Chicago, working as a junior architect, but was in New York temporarily for a project near Times Square. By the time they parted ways, exchanging numbers felt natural, almost expected. Sophia scribbled her digits on the corner of one of her nursing notes before tucking it into his hand. That night, Michael found himself staring at her number longer than he cared to admit. Something about Sophia lingered in his mind, the gentleness of her tone, the way she carried herself with quiet strength. He told himself it was just coincidence. But deep down, he knew he wanted to see her again. Their first official meeting outside the park happened at a cozy cafe in Greenwich Village. The cafe was small, with worn-out leather chairs, shelves of second-hand books, and the soft strum of a guitar playing in the background. Sophia arrived in a simple denim jacket, her hair tied back, and Michael couldn't help but think she looked effortlessly graceful. They talked for hours, about her childhood in Brooklyn, about his love for Chicago's skyline, about family, about dreams. Sophia confessed her fear of failure in the demanding world of medicine, while Michael admitted how much pressure he felt to prove himself in architecture. They both laughed at how different their worlds seemed yet how easily their hearts synced in conversation. When the evening ended, Michael walked her back to her apartment building on East 14th Street. The streetlights cast a soft golden glow, and for a moment, neither of them wanted to say goodbye. Sophia smiled nervously, holding her bag tighter, while Michael hesitated, his heart pounding. "Can I see you again?" he asked. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes glimmering with both hesitation and hope. "I'd like that." What neither of them knew that night was that this chance encounter, this small accident in Central Park, was the beginning of a love story that would one day bring both joy and fear, passion and suspicion, light and shadow. Because while Michael thought he had found the woman of his dreams, fate had other plans. And one day, he would whisper the words with trembling lips. "She is after my life." Michael and Sophia's relationship grew quietly at first, like the steady rhythm of a song that builds over time. Their second date was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a place Sophia loved for its history and endless stories painted on canvas. Michael wasn't much of an art person, but the way her eyes lit up as she explained the paintings made him fall in love with the experience itself. As they walked through the Egyptian galleries, Michael teased, "You sound like a tour guide. Should I be paying you for this?" Sophia laughed softly, brushing her hand against his. "Maybe just a coffee later. That's my fee." It was in small moments like these that Michael realized how easy it was to be around her. She didn't pretend, she didn't force anything, her presence carried a warmth that melted away the stress of his long hours at the architectural firm. On weekends, they'd meet at different corners of New York. Sometimes it was Coney Island, eating hot dogs and cotton candy as the waves crashed in the background. Other times, it was long walks across the Brooklyn Bridge, where the city lights twinkled like scattered diamonds. Michael found himself memorizing these little details, the way Sophia always tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, how she carried a notebook full of quotes she collected, how she sometimes stared at the city skyline with a look he couldn't quite read, as if she was chasing something beyond her reach. One chilly December evening, Michael surprised Sophia with ice skating at Rockefeller Center. The massive Christmas tree glittered above them, and the air smelled of roasted peanuts and hot cocoa. Michael wasn't much of a skater. He stumbled awkwardly while Sophia glided with grace. She laughed until tears welled in her eyes. "You're hopeless, Michael." "Hopelessly in love," he said without thinking. Sophia froze for a moment, staring at him as if those words had slipped into her soul. Then, slowly, she squeezed his hand. "Don't say things you don't mean." Michael looked straight into her eyes. "I mean every word."
By the time spring arrived, their relationship had deepened into something undeniable. Michael extended his New York project just to stay longer. Sophia started planning her nursing shifts so she could spend more time with him. They shared meals, secrets, and even arguments, the kind that ended with laughter instead of distance. One rainy afternoon in Soho, they took shelter in a bookstore. Sophia wandered to the poetry section while Michael browsed architecture magazines. When they reunited near the cashier, Sophia handed him a small book of poems. Inside, she had written in careful handwriting. "For Michael, so you'll remember that not all structures are made of stone. Some are built in the heart." Michael carried that book with him everywhere. But even as their love blossomed, there were shadows neither of them could see. Sophia carried a quiet heaviness. Sometimes she'd drift into silence, staring out of windows as though haunted by memories she refused to share. Michael noticed, but he didn't push. He believed love was patience, and he was willing to wait until she was ready. One night, sitting by the Hudson River, Sophia finally asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Do you believe love can survive anything?" Michael thought for a long moment. "I think if it's real, if it's true, it can. But sometimes, people don't survive their own battles. And love can only hold on for so long." Sophia's eyes glistened, and she whispered, "I hope you're right." That spring, Michael took Sophia on a trip to Chicago. He wanted her to see his world, the city he called home, the skyline he had fallen in love with as a boy. They walked by Lake Michigan, strolled through Millennium Park, and even had deep-dish pizza in a crowded corner restaurant. His parents, Richard and Evelyn Carter, welcomed Sophia warmly, treating her as if she was already family. Sophia smiled through it all, but Michael noticed her grip tighten on his hand whenever family was mentioned. Still, she charmed everyone with her kindness and sincerity. Back in New York, their love only grew stronger. Michael knew, without a doubt, that Sophia was the one. The one he wanted to build a home with, the one he wanted to face life's storms beside. But even as he dreamed of forever, something in Sophia's eyes told a different story, one he couldn't quite read yet. And though their love seemed unbreakable, fate was quietly preparing its test. Because what started as a sweet romance between a man from Chicago and a woman from New York, would one day become a haunting tale of fear, betrayal, and redemption. Michael didn't know it yet. Sophia didn't know it yet. But soon, love would be tested in ways neither of them imagined. And Michael would whisper again, with trembling breath. "She is after my life." The day Michael proposed to Sophia was as ordinary as any other day in New York City, but he had planned every detail with care. It was early summer, and the sun set behind the skyline, painting the Brooklyn Bridge in warm gold. They had walked across together countless times before, but this time Michael paused halfway, his heart thundering in his chest. He pulled out a small velvet box, his voice trembling. "Sophia Williams, will you marry me?" For a moment, time stood still. Pedestrians walked past, the river shimmered below, and the city buzzed with life. Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she covered her mouth with her hand. Finally, she whispered, "Yes, yes, I will." Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, and the crowd around them erupted in cheers. But what he noticed most was the way Sophia clung to him afterward, as though afraid of letting go. Their wedding was held 6 months later in Chicago, at a historic church in Lincoln Park. The tall stained-glass windows cast brilliant colors on the aisle, and the smell of roses filled the air. Michael stood at the altar in a tailored black suit, his hazel eyes scanning the room nervously until he saw her. Sophia walked in, dressed in a flowing white gown that shimmered under the light. A lace veil framed her delicate features, and in that moment, Michael thought she looked like an angel. His breath caught. This was the woman he had prayed for, the woman who had become his reason for hope. The ceremony was intimate, filled with family and close friends. Michael's parents, Richard and Evelyn Carter, beamed with pride. Sophia's parents, Daniel and Margaret Williams, had flown in from Brooklyn, and though Sophia's father looked stern, her mother couldn't hide her joy. When the vows were exchanged, Sophia's voice wavered slightly. Her eyes glistened, and Michael thought it was from emotion. But somewhere in her trembling, there was a shadow, a flicker of something he couldn't name. "I promise," she said softly, sliding the ring onto his finger, "to love you through everything." The reception was held at a grand ballroom overlooking Lake Michigan. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and music echoed through the hall as guests danced, toasted, and celebrated. Michael's best man gave a humorous speech about their college days, and Sophia's maid of honor shared how Sophia had always dreamed of a love that felt like destiny. But destiny, as the night would prove, had a complicated sense of humor. During the first dance, Michael held Sophia close as they swayed to the music. He whispered, "You make me the happiest man alive." Sophia smiled, her cheek pressed against his chest. But instead of joy, her eyes looked distant, almost haunted. She blinked quickly, forcing back tears, and whispered, "I'll never let you go, Michael. Never." He thought she meant forever love. He didn't realize she also meant something else, something darker. The night was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and endless congratulations. Sophia seemed radiant on the outside, greeting guests with warmth and grace. Yet when she thought no one was watching, her smile would falter. Her fingers trembled whenever she was alone, and she would press her hand against her chest as though fighting an invisible battle. Michael noticed, but he told himself it was just nerves, the overwhelming emotions of the day. He kissed her hand and reassured her, promising that their new life together would be perfect. Their honeymoon took them to Los Angeles, California, where they strolled along Santa Monica Pier, ate ice cream under the sun, and rode the Ferris wheel overlooking the Pacific Ocean. At night, they stayed at a beachside resort, the sound of waves lulling them to sleep. Michael was overjoyed, convinced that he had found everything he had ever wanted. Sophia laughed, smiled, and kissed him deeply, but when she thought he was asleep, she often sat by the window, staring at the ocean with a hollow look in her eyes. By the time they returned to Chicago to start their life as husband and wife, everything seemed perfect from the outside. They moved into a cozy apartment overlooking the river, filled it with photographs, and promised each other that no matter what storms came, their love would endure. And for a while, it did. But hidden beneath Sophia's vows, beneath her laughter and her smiles, was a secret. A pain she carried silently, a wound Michael didn't yet see. The wedding had been beautiful. The promises had been sincere. But the story that began with love was about to take a darker turn. Soon, Michael would no longer see the angel in the white gown. He would see a woman whose gaze sent chills down his spine. And he would begin to wonder. Was she truly after his heart? Or was she after his life? At first, married life felt like stepping into a dream. Michael and Sophia settled into their apartment overlooking the Chicago River, where every morning sunlight streamed through the large windows and painted their walls golden. The city's hum became the soundtrack of their new life, the honking of cars, the whistle of trains, the distant murmur of people on the sidewalks below. Michael loved waking up to Sophia's presence beside him. She would sit by the window, sipping coffee, still in her robe, as if she belonged to that moment more than anything else. He often joked, "I don't need an alarm clock anymore, just you sitting there, looking like the cover of a magazine." Sophia would laugh, rolling her eyes, but deep down, she cherished his words. They spent weekends exploring Chicago together. On Saturdays, they strolled through Navy Pier, eating popcorn and riding the Ferris wheel that gave them a panoramic view of the skyline. On Sundays, they wandered through Millennium Park, taking pictures by the Bean, laughing as tourists crowded around them.
Some nights they'd collapse on the couch, too tired to talk, just holding hands while a movie played in the background. Other nights, Michael would surprise Sophia with candles and dinner, insisting she deserved more than just work and sleep. "This," she once whispered as she leaned into him, "this feels like home." But even in happiness, there were shadows that lingered. Sometimes, Sophia would wake in the middle of the night, gasping for air. Michael would jolt awake, wrapping his arms around her, asking what was wrong. She'd shake her head, whispering, "Just a bad dream," though her trembling hands told a different story. Other times, he'd notice her standing at the balcony, staring down at the city with an intensity that unsettled him. When he asked what she was thinking, she'd quickly smile and say, "Nothing at all." Michael brushed it off, believing every marriage had its quirks. Still, a small seed of unease began to take root in his heart. Their families remained supportive. Richard and Evelyn Carter often visited, bringing warmth into their apartment. Sophia's parents would call from Brooklyn, though her father's tone always carried a hint of distance, as if there were unspoken tensions. Michael didn't understand it. "Your parents love you," he assured her once. Sophia nodded but stayed silent, her eyes clouded with something she didn't voice. By their first anniversary, Michael was certain their love was unshakable. He surprised Sophia with a trip to New Orleans, a city rich with music and history. They strolled through the French Quarter, dined on gumbo and beignets, and danced to the rhythm of jazz bands in the streets. One evening, under the flicker of gas lamps, Sophia turned to him and said, "Promise me something, Michael." "Anything," he replied. "Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll never stop fighting for us." Michael smiled, kissing her forehead. "I promise." Her eyes lingered on his face, searching, almost desperate. "Good," she whispered. For 2 years, their life seemed perfect. Friends admired their bond, colleagues envied their devotion, and family praised their strength. But behind the walls of their apartment, cracks began to form. Sophia's late-night shifts became longer. Michael's projects demanded more time. They saw each other less, and when they did, Sophia seemed distant, smiling on the outside, but lost somewhere inside her own thoughts. Michael tried to ignore it, but a growing question gnawed at him. Was the woman he married slipping away? And though he didn't know it yet, the sweet beginning was only the calm before the storm. Because soon, Sophia's warmth would turn into something else, something cold, unpredictable, and dangerous. Michael's dream of a perfect marriage was about to unravel. And with each passing day, the thought would creep into his mind. She is after my life. At first, the changes were small, so small Michael convinced himself they were nothing. A forgotten smile, a colder tone, a hesitation in her touch. But over time, those small cracks widened into something impossible to ignore. Sophia was no longer the woman who laughed easily at his jokes or whispered dreams into his ear at night. She grew restless, withdrawn, and at times, unrecognizably sharp. It started with her work schedule. Sophia's shifts at Northwestern Memorial Hospital became longer, stretching late into the night. Michael would come home from his firm, the apartment dim and empty, dinner left untouched. Sometimes she wouldn't return until dawn, her excuse always the same: patience needed me. At first, Michael believed her. But one night, when she slipped quietly into the apartment at 3 a.m., he noticed something strange. Her hands trembled, her eyes looked wild, and she smelled faintly of smoke, though she claimed she had only been at the hospital. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting up in bed. Sophia froze in the doorway, her face shadowed. "Why wouldn't I be?" she snapped before disappearing into the bathroom. It was the first time her voice carried sharpness, and it left Michael stunned. The change spread to their conversations. Once, they would talk about everything: dreams, fears, even silly things. Now, Sophia grew defensive over the smallest questions. "Where were you after work?" Michael asked one evening. "Why are you keeping tabs on me?" she shot back, slamming a glass onto the counter. Michael blinked, hurt. "I was just asking." Her eyes softened for a split second before hardening again. "Don't." That word, sharp, final, cut deeper than any argument. Michael tried to bring back the old warmth. He surprised her with flowers from a shop near Michigan Avenue, planned dinners at her favorite restaurants, even suggested a weekend trip to San Francisco. Sophia smiled politely, thanked him, but the joy was gone from her eyes. It wasn't rejection, it was distance, as though she was standing behind a wall he couldn't break through. One night, as rain poured outside their Chicago apartment, Michael woke to the sound of whispers. He found Sophia in the living room, speaking softly on the phone. Her voice was urgent, almost frantic. "Don't call me again," she said before slamming the phone shut. When she saw Michael standing in the doorway, her face drained of color. "Who was that?" he asked. "No one," she said quickly. "Go back to bed." Michael wanted to press further, but something in her expression, something dark and fragile, stopped him. The more Michael noticed, the more fear seeped into his thoughts. Sophia began locking drawers in their apartment, keeping her phone close at all times, and flinching whenever he touched her unexpectedly. Sometimes she would stare at him across the dinner table, silent, her eyes unreadable. And in those moments, Michael felt something he never thought he would feel toward the woman he loved.
When their families visited, Sophia put on the perfect act. She laughed with Evelyn, helped Richard with dinner, and smiled warmly at Michael's cousins. To everyone else, she was still the charming, devoted wife. But behind closed doors, Michael saw another side, cold, distant, and unpredictable. He told himself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe even burnout from her demanding job. But deep down, a whisper haunted him. What if it's something else? One evening, while cleaning their study, Michael accidentally knocked over one of Sophia's nursing textbooks. A folded paper slipped out, a letter. He picked it up, hesitating. The handwriting wasn't hers. It read, "You can't keep running from this, Sophia. One day, it will destroy everything you've built." Michael's chest tightened. When Sophia walked in and saw the letter in his hand, her face went pale. She snatched it away, her voice trembling with anger. "Don't ever touch my things again." Michael stared at her, stunned. "Sophia, what's going on?" But she didn't answer. She turned her back and walked out, leaving him in silence. That night, as Michael lay awake in bed, he realized something terrifying. The woman he had married, the woman he loved more than life itself, was slipping into someone he didn't recognize. And though he tried to shake the thought away, one sentence echoed in his mind. "She is after my life." Michael's once stable world began to tilt, as if every piece of his marriage was shifting into something unrecognizable. The Sophia he had fallen in love with, the gentle, warm,
That night,
selfless
Michael
woman,
locked himself
was now
in
a
the guest
stranger
room
who
for the
seemed to
first
wear her
time.
love like a mask.
He couldn't sleep. Every creak of the apartment, every sound of footsteps outside the door, made his heart pound. For the first time since their marriage began, Michael felt unsafe in his own home. Days passed, and Michael became hyper-aware of everything Sophia did. He noticed knives missing from the kitchen drawer, found her medicine bottles hidden in places he'd never think to look, and once caught her staring at him through the reflection of the bathroom mirror. The woman he once adored now filled him with dread. He began keeping his phone on him at all times, considering whether he should call someone, anyone, for help. But how could he explain it? To the world, Sophia was still the devoted nurse, the loving wife. Only he saw the cracks in her mask. One evening, as they sat together in silence, Sophia suddenly leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "Michael, do you ever think about how fragile life is? How one small decision can end it all?" His breath caught. "Why would you say something like that?" Sophia smiled faintly, her fingers brushing his hand. "Because sometimes I wonder if you'd survive without me." Michael pulled his hand back, his heart racing. And for the first time, he truly believed the thought he had been pushing away for weeks. "She is after my life." Michael could no longer pretend things were fine. His once loving wife now felt like a shadow haunting their apartment, her behavior growing stranger by the day. The fear gnawed at him, but so did the unanswered questions. One night, while Sophia was working a late shift at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Michael made a decision he had resisted for months: he would search for answers. He started with her locked drawer. After carefully prying it open, he found a collection of things that made his blood run cold: crumpled letters, newspaper clippings, and prescription bottles. One clipping in particular caught his eye. It was from a New York Times article dated 5 years earlier. "Local nurse escapes tragedy, apartment fire claims 2 lives in Brooklyn." The photo beneath it showed a burned-down building. The article mentioned Sophia Williams, a young nursing student who survived the fire, but her roommate and fiancé at the time had not. Michael's chest tightened. Fiancé? He read further. Witnesses claimed Sophia had been seen arguing with the man the night before the fire. Authorities ruled it an accident, but rumors suggested otherwise.
When Sophia returned home, Michael confronted her. Holding up the article, he whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Sophia froze in the doorway, her face pale. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with trembling hands, she took the paper from him and sank into a chair. "I didn't tell you because I wanted to forget," she whispered. "But the past doesn't stay buried." Through broken words and tears, Sophia revealed the truth. Before Michael, before Chicago, she had been engaged to a man named Ethan in Brooklyn. They had argued often. He was controlling, jealous, and manipulative. The night of the fire, their fight had escalated. Sophia left the apartment to clear her head, only to return to find the building engulfed in flames. Ethan and her roommate never made it out. The police ruled it an accident caused by faulty wiring, but Ethan's family accused Sophia of negligence, even of setting the fire deliberately. Though she was never charged, the weight of the accusations destroyed her. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Do you understand now, Michael? I didn't change because I stopped loving you. I changed because I'm terrified. Every time I look at you, I see what I lost before. I can't lose you too. That's why I watch you at night, why I keep you close, why I panic when you're late. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to make sure you don't leave me." Michael sat in stunned silence. The puzzle pieces shifted in his mind: her trembling hands, her fear of abandonment, her obsession with control. It wasn't malice. It was trauma. But trauma that now threatened to shatter their marriage. For the first time, Michael didn't feel anger. He felt sorrow. He reached out, taking her shaking hands in his. "Sophia, you're not alone anymore. You don't have to fight this by yourself. She looked up at him, eyes wide with both hope and fear. But what if one day I destroy us, just like I destroyed everything before? Michael's voice cracked. Then we'll fight it together. You haven't destroyed me, Sophia. You've just been hiding behind your pain. That night, Sophia fell asleep in his arms for the first time in months, her breathing finally steady. Michael, however, lay awake. He now understood the darkness behind her eyes, the whispers in the night, the desperate grip she held on him. But understanding didn't erase the danger. Sophia's trauma had turned into obsession, and if they didn't find a way to heal, love alone might not be enough to save them. The truth was out, but the real question remained. Could love survive a past that refused to stay buried? Michael wanted to believe it could. But deep inside, a chilling thought lingered. If her fear consumed her completely, then one day, she really might be after my life.
For weeks after Sophia's confession, Michael carried the weight of her truth in silence. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the ghosts of Brooklyn that still clung to her. But the fear hadn't vanished. The sleepless nights, the paranoia, the sudden mood swings, they still lingered like storm clouds above their marriage. Michael knew he couldn't handle this alone anymore. One Sunday, he invited both families to their apartment in Chicago. Richard and Evelyn Carter arrived first, carrying homemade food. Not long after, Daniel and Margaret Williams stepped through the door from New York, their faces tight with hesitation. It was the first time in months that the families had gathered under one roof. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, and Sophia sat in the corner, avoiding her father's eyes. After dinner, Michael stood and cleared his throat. His voice wavered as he said, "There's something we all need to talk about. Something Sophia has carried for too long." Sophia's head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. "Michael, don't." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Slowly, painfully, Sophia shared her story, the fire, the accusations, the trauma that had followed her into their marriage. Her words trembled, her voice breaking more than once. When she finished, silence filled the room. Daniel Williams, her father, spoke first. His voice was stern, but softer than Michael had ever heard. "Sophia, all these years, I thought your distance was defiance. I didn't realize it was pain." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "You never asked." Daniel swallowed hard. "You're right. I failed you as a father. But I'm here now. We are here now." Margaret reached across the table, clutching her daughter's hand. "You should never have carried this alone, sweetheart." Evelyn Carter, Michael's mother, added gently, "Sophia, healing doesn't come from hiding. It comes from letting others in. You've been fighting shadows in silence. It's time to let us fight with you." For the first time in years, Sophia looked at her parents and Michael's parents not as separate families, but as a united force standing beside her. In the weeks that followed, both families became pillars in their lives. Daniel began calling Sophia regularly, checking on her not as a critic but as a father trying to rebuild trust. Margaret flew out often, cooking meals and staying with her when Michael had late nights at work. Richard and Evelyn introduced them to a family counselor in Chicago's North Side, someone who specialized in trauma and marriage therapy. Though Sophia was hesitant at first, Michael persuaded her to attend.
The sessions weren't easy. Sophia broke down more than once, reliving the fire and the guilt that haunted her. Michael struggled too, confessing how fear had begun to poison his love. But together, with their family's support, they began to rebuild. Michael started to see glimpses of the woman he had married, the Sophia who once laughed at Coney Island, who collected quotes in a notebook, who believed love could survive anything. And Sophia, for the first time, began to believe that her past didn't have to dictate her future. One evening, after a family counseling session, they all gathered at Navy Pier. The Ferris wheel spun slowly against the night sky, the city lights shimmering in the distance. Sophia looked around, her parents chatting with Michael's, laughter echoing in the air, and tears filled her eyes. She leaned into Michael's shoulder and whispered, for the first time in years, "I don't feel alone." Michael kissed her forehead. "You never were. You just couldn't see it." But even as hope returned, Sophia's journey wasn't over. Healing wasn't a straight road, it was full of setbacks, fears, and doubts. And Michael knew that at any moment, the shadows of her past could try to pull her back. The difference now was clear, she wasn't fighting those shadows alone. For the first time, the families stood together, a wall against the darkness. And perhaps, just perhaps, love and unity would prove stronger than the haunting words that had once consumed Michael's thoughts. "She is after my life." Months passed, and Sophia made steady progress. Counseling sessions on Chicago's North Side became a lifeline. She began journaling again, something she hadn't done since college in New York. Each entry peeled back the layers of grief and guilt she had buried for years. But despite the progress, one piece of her past still chained her heart: Ethan's family. The voices of his parents still haunted her. Their accusations, their stares in the Brooklyn courthouse when she was questioned, those wounds had never healed. Until she faced them, Sophia knew she would never truly be free. One winter morning, after a sleepless night, she told Michael, "I need to go back to Brooklyn." Michael's eyes widened. "Sophia, are you sure?" Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. "If I keep running, this will follow me forever. I need to face them, to face myself." Michael squeezed her hand. "Then we'll face it together." They flew to New York a week later. The city was cold, snow dusting the sidewalks of Brooklyn. Sophia hadn't walked these streets since the fire. Each step was heavy with memory, the laughter she once shared, the smoke that had taken it all away. Together, Michael and Sophia stood before the small brick house of Ethan's parents. Michael offered to knock, but Sophia shook her head. "This is my burden. I have to do it."
When the door opened, Ethan's mother stood frozen, her face a mix of shock and bitterness. His father appeared behind her, his jaw tightening at the sight of Sophia. For a moment, silence hung like ice in the air. Sophia's voice cracked as she whispered, "I came, not to reopen wounds, but to say what I should have said years ago." Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke. "I am sorry. Sorry for the pain, sorry for the questions left unanswered. I didn't set that fire, but I've carried the weight of believing I could have done more. I lost him too. And I lost myself in the process." Her voice broke. "But I can't keep drowning in the past. I need to live, and I need to love the man who chose me despite my scars." Ethan's mother's eyes softened, though pain still lingered. His father looked away, struggling with emotions he couldn't voice. Finally, Ethan's mother whispered, "Sophia, grief made us cruel. Maybe it's time we all stop letting that night define us." Sophia collapsed into tears, Michael catching her in his arms. For the first time in years, the invisible chains around her heart loosened. When they walked away from that house, the Brooklyn air felt different. Lighter. Back in Chicago, Sophia embraced healing with new strength. She continued therapy, leaned on her family, and, for the first time in their marriage, trusted Michael fully with her fears instead of hiding them. Their home, once filled with shadows, began to echo with laughter again. They cooked meals together, took late-night walks along the Chicago River, and rebuilt the intimacy they had almost lost. One night, sitting on their balcony overlooking the city lights, Sophia turned to Michael. "Do you still think I'm after your life?" she asked with a sad smile. Michael took her hand, kissed it, and shook his head. "No. I think you were after your own life all along, fighting to find it again." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time, they were tears of release. Their story hadn't been perfect. It had been broken, bruised, nearly shattered. But in its imperfection lay the strength that made it whole again. For Michael, the lesson was clear: love isn't about perfection. It's about endurance, patience, and standing together even when shadows threaten to tear you apart. And for Sophia, the lesson was even clearer: the past may shape you, but it doesn't have to destroy you. Healing begins when you stop running, and start facing the truth. Their marriage wasn't just saved. It was transformed. And in that transformation, the haunting title that once defined Michael's fear, "She is after my life," became something entirely new. She wasn't after his life to destroy it. She was after it to share it. Forever.
Love is not the absence of struggle, but the choice to endure together. Trauma can twist hearts, yet healing blooms when families unite and truth is faced. Michael and Sophia's story reminds us, shadows don't define us, courage, forgiveness, and commitment do. Together, brokenness becomes strength.